It seems that the launch of Starship's fifth test flight is not going to take place in the second week of September, as Elon previously predicted, but it's going to get delayed further. Why did I say that? All is going to get revealed in today's episode of Alpha Tech. And before getting into our main content, we want to let you know, first of all, thank you for supporting our channel over these last few years. We are very close to the 100,000 subscriber mark, and to achieve this, we need your help. So please hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our amazing content. And it also gives us the motivation to continue creating these videos for you every day. All right, let's continue. A recent surprising piece of info seems to have revealed the most accurate schedule for the upcoming Starship launch. And interestingly, it did not come from SpaceX or the FAA, but from NASA. Can we trust NASA? Sure, many people are going to ask that. However, it must be remembered that NASA is SpaceX's biggest customer, and their major projects depend a lot on Starship. NASA is the organization that needs to feel the urgency and be pushing for this launch. Therefore, there's no reason for them to give us phony info. So it's clear that they've received newly disclosed news from the FAA as well as SpaceX that has not yet been made public. On the morning of August 30th, during an online meeting, NASA official Kathy Corner said that the Starship Test Flight 5 is expected later this fall. In fact, the first day of fall is September 22nd, which means Starship 5 test flight will not happen before September 22nd. This is going to result in a much longer interval between launches 4 and 5 compared to the previously improved intervals. Specifically, if Launch 5 takes place in the latter half of September, SpaceX will take nearly 5 months from early June, when the 4 Starship launch happened. Quite frankly, taking such a long time is partly due to all those delays in the FAA's licensing processes. Earlier in August, SpaceX announced on X that Starship and Super Heavy were ready to fly, pending regulatory approval. It's unclear why they're taking so long. With previous approvals, I kind of thought that this thing between SpaceX and FAA had gotten better, but appears maybe not so much. Recent incidents have caused a lot of concern. For instance, the explosion of the Falcon 9 rocket booster, we all saw that. Clearly, other space companies losing a booster or having it explode in the air is a pretty common occurrence. But why does the FAA got to conduct an investigation when Falcon 9's booster blows up? Honestly, that doesn't seem to warrant FAA involvement or just an excuse for another government agency to get their hands on SpaceX. Although by August 31st, Falcon 9 resumed launches just 2 days after the explosion, the FAA's action is really inappropriate. On the other hand, we can't say the FAA is strict with all rockets and spacecraft launches, because Starliner and Boeing had so many problems, yet the FAA didn't investigate or ground them. Not to mention, the troubling flaws of the spacecraft have been discovered since previous tests all the way back to 2019. That's a huge letdown for SpaceX, as time and time again, they've been rigorously investigated by the FAA, but they got no choice but to accept these investigations and just use the waiting time to do more tests. And the wait for the launch license for the 5th Starship launch is no different. Although us space enthusiasts are going to have to wait a longer time, it's worth it for what SpaceX is going to be able to do in this upcoming launch. The booster catching activity is currently the main focus, so recent activities at SpaceX's Starbase are centered on important updates and preparations for this. One of the most notable developments is related to the chopstick catch arms, a crucial component of SpaceX's innovative approach to recovering boosters. These massive mechanical arms are designed to catch the Super Heavy booster mid-air as it returns to Earth after launch, and that eliminates the need for a traditional landing pad and potentially allows for quicker turnaround time between launches. Almost every day over the last few weeks, workers wielding welding guns and torches have climbed into the Starship launch pad in South Texas to make last-minute upgrades. Notably, some details on the arms have been removed, suggesting a shift in SpaceX's strategy or design philosophy. SpaceX removed bumpers and cushions from the arms. These components were originally put on to absorb impact and give a buffer during the booster catch. However, their removal could indicate that SpaceX has developed alternative methods for managing impact forces or has refined the precision of the booster's descent to the point where such cushioning is no longer necessary. This change could also imply a new focus on improving the durability and maintenance of the catch arms by reducing the number of moving parts and potential points of failure. These changes may reflect lessons learned from previous tests or simulations, with the goal of optimizing the catch maneuver or ensuring greater reliability and safety during booster recovery. By removing specific elements, SpaceX might be able to cut the weight of the arms or simplify their operation, and that could enhance the overall efficiency and accuracy of the catch process. It's not yet known if this change could lead to a retest of the B-14.1 test tank, but if SpaceX wants to be even more confident in the operation of the chopsticks after the adjustments, a drop test would not be necessary. On top of that, August 24th, we did see some activity on this test tank. possibly equipped with 2 load points, which further confirms that its mission is not over yet. This indicates SpaceX's intense focus on the mission to catch the Super Heavy booster in this upcoming launch, and that would be a huge step forward if they succeed. But if we ever wondered why SpaceX doesn't do this with Falcon 9, clearly Falcon 9's been a successful rocket with landings on drone ships and on land, so catching them would likely be a simpler and safer next step than catching Starship, which we don't know if they can land precisely. Of course, there's a reason. Unlike traditional aerospace companies, SpaceX has chosen to develop a new system, the chopstick arms, specifically for the next-gen Starship and Super Heavy booster. This decision aligns with the company's focus on pushing boundaries and adopting new technologies, rather than retrofitting existing systems with incremental changes. By not testing the catching maneuver with Falcon 9, SpaceX has chosen to focus its resources on developing technologies that will be crucial for future missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. SpaceX's rapid development and testing approach is characterized by a willingness to take risks and learn from failures. This method is illustrated by their test, fail, fix cycle that allows them to quickly iterate on designs and systems. Instead of spending tons of years on extensive preliminary testing and analysis, SpaceX just moves straight to building prototypes and doing real-world tests. This fast-paced development process allows the company to identify the issues early on, make the quick adjustments, and then accelerate innovation. Central to SpaceX's philosophy is the concept of breaking stuff quickly and then making it better. This means that SpaceX intentionally pushes its hardware and systems to their limits. They even welcome failures as valuable learning opportunities. This approach contrasts sharply with more conservative aerospace practices, where risk mitigation and failure avoidance are often paramount. By embracing a culture of rapid iteration and constantly improving, SpaceX has been able to make quick adjustments, incorporating lessons learned to their next version of their vehicles. This mindset plays a huge role in SpaceX's ability to design cutting-edge technologies and maintain their position as pioneers in the aerospace industry. And Starship is thoroughly applying these philosophies, and the program is on the right track. Catherine Corner, the administrator in charge of NASA's exploration systems development, recently stated that SpaceX has made tremendous progress with Starship in the first 4 test flights of the program. The next milestone in NASA's $2.9 billion lunar lander contract with SpaceX is for the company to demonstrate that it can transfer cryogenic liquid oxygen and methane propellants between the 2 Starships in orbit. The latest info from NASA indicates that this mission, which requires SpaceX to bring a second launch pad into operation in Texas, is going to happen in the first 3 months of next year. Corner did not give us an updated timeline in an interview, but does note that there's a lot of hard work to be done before SpaceX is ready for the propellant transfer demo. They have a number of milestones that they have to reach before they can get to the point where they do that, she said. SpaceX is going to need to launch a series of Starship tanker vehicles to fully fuel the lunar lander Starship and LEO before it can go to the moon to meet NASA astronauts, who will then board it to the surface. Earlier this year, a SpaceX official estimated that each Starship lunar landing mission would require about 10 tanker flights over several weeks. The rapid recovery and reuse of boosters and vehicles will make such a high flight rate even more feasible. Therefore, while a few of the upcoming Starship flights aren't part of NASA's lunar lander contract, we can call them supportive elements for the capabilities that NASA needs for its moon missions. This next flight and the next several flights are not contract deliverable milestones for them, Corner said. These are learning milestones for them to do their own development activities. In the race to conquer space, what can stop SpaceX's ambitions? Ironically, the biggest obstacle is not technological, but rather an environmental bureaucracy, the Federal Aviation Administration. Recently, we received the latest updates on the FAA licenses for Falcon 9 and Starship's upcoming flights. For quite some time, FAA has been known as a key regulatory body. Every flight in the U.S., including those hitting space, have to get approved by the FAA. This is a mandatory regulation that no one is exempt from in the U.S. This principle also applies to rocket explosions. In addition to the investigating efforts of the companies involved, FAA plays a crucial role in overseeing the process. They hold the ultimate authority to decide whether a company and its rockets can return to normal operations. So, recently, there was a booster explosion from SpaceX that prompted the FAA to step in and conduct an investigation once again. On the morning of August 28th, a Falcon 9 rocket successfully launched 21 of SpaceX's Starlink satellites into orbit on the record-breaking 23rd mission of its first stage. During the landing process, the first stage descent seemed normal until the touchdown, when more flames than usual appeared around the rocket's base as it neared the ship's deck. A landing leg immediately broke upon, and the booster, obscured by fire and smoke, tipped over the side of the drone ship, falling into the Atlantic Ocean. After a successful ascent, Falcon 9's first stage booster tipped over following touchdown on the ace shortfall of Gravitas drone ship, SpaceX said on X. Teams are assessing the booster's flight data and status. The landing mishap ended a streak of 267 consecutive successful booster recoveries since Feb of 2021. It was the 23rd flight for the first stage B-1062 and also its final launch and landing. This sets a new reusable record as SpaceX strives to certify the Falcon 9's first stage for up to 40 flights each. Speaking about the incident, Elon Musk was not too surprised. He responded under the post about the booster exploding. Now we figure on what went wrong to drive the landing failure rate above 1 in 1,000, then 1 in 10,000, 1 in a million, etc. Elon aims to take a systematic approach to improve reliability and safety during the development of landing technology. Initially, the goal is to reduce the failure rate to below 1 in 1,000. Once that's achieved, the next target's to hit 1 in 10,000, then 1 in a million, and so on. This process requires thorough research into the root cause of each failure, learning from mistakes, and continuously improving processes and technology. This approach is akin to losing the battle to win the war in complex and high-risk operations like rocket launches and landings. Although SpaceX is conducting its investigation, the FAA is closely overseeing. In fact, the FAA has banned SpaceX's Falcon 9 rockets, including the Polaris Dawn booster, until the investigation is complete and corrective actions are approved. A return to flight of the Falcon 9 booster rocket is based on the FAA determining that any system, process, or procedure related to the anomaly does not affect public safety, FAA said in a statement. In addition, SpaceX may need to request and receive approval from the FAA to modify its license that incorporates any corrective actions and meets all other licensing requirements, the agency said. It's unclear how long this is going to take. However, a relatively quick resolution is possible. Eric Berger, a pretty well-known space journalist, offered some reassurance to the space community. For those hand-wringing about Falcon 9 getting grounded, I don't expect the FAA investigation to impact the SpaceX launch manifest too much. This is probably not a weeks thing, more like days, maybe hours. Indeed, SpaceX works very quickly. The company returned the Falcon 9 in flight last month, just 15 days after the second stage of the rocket experienced an anomaly, resulting in the loss of 23 Starlinks. The incident on Wednesday morning was not as serious, only affecting the rocket's landing. The upper stage of the Falcon 9 successfully delivered the Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit as planned. However, even a few days of grounding could impact a very important launch that SpaceX is readying for, and that's Polaris Dawn, which is going to send 4 people into orbit on a pioneering 5-day mission, including the first ever private spacewalk. A scheduled launch attempt for this mission early on August 27th got canceled after a helium leak was detected in the ground system supporting the rocket. Then a second launch attempt of the vehicle early August 28th got canceled just hours before liftoff due to weather. Meteorologists were concerned about sea conditions for the Crew Dragon's landing 3 to 5 days after the launch when the spacecraft returned to Earth in waters near Florida. Our launch criteria are heavily constrained by forecasted splashdown weather conditions, Jared Isaacman wrote on X on Tuesday evening. With no ISS rendezvous and limited life support consumables, we must be absolutely sure of re-entry weather before launching. As of now, conditions are not favorable tonight or tomorrow, so we'll assess day by day. The Polaris Dawn mission could be launched as early as the morning of Friday, August 30th, at around 3:38 a.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. However, this depends on 2 things, the weather and the FAA. On the other hand, we can see SpaceX seems to feel quite comfortable understanding the landing incident of the Starlink launch on Wednesday morning, and it's not overly concerned about the FAA's investigation, as if they're certain of the outcome. What do you think? Feel free to let us know in the comments if you have a differing opinion. In addition to the Falcon 9 case, FAA is also responsible for evaluating the 5th Starship flight. However, in contrast to SpaceX's readiness, the FAA has yet to make significant progress in updating the approval process. Fortunately, a positive update from the FAA was recently released. The FAA is evaluating SpaceX's proposed license modification for its Flight 5 mission. SpaceX must meet all safety, environmental, and other licensing requirements prior to FAA authorization. Safety will drive the timeline. Please contact SpaceX for info about the proposed changes to its license. The FAA's evaluation will review SpaceX's entire launch process, but above all, the agency will focus on the new aspects of the upcoming Starship flight. First, SpaceX will test restarting the engines while the spacecraft's already in space, a test that's been planned for a long time, but has been repeatedly delayed. Secondly, for the first time, they'll attempt to catch the Super Heavy booster with a Mechazilla arm system. Both these missions are groundbreaking, promising major advances, but also carrying some significant risks. Given these new experiments, the FAA needs to conduct a thorough assessment of potential environmental impacts in related systems. They'll also review the risk mitigation measures proposed by SpaceX. However, this evaluation process may be quicker than previous flight, when SpaceX first had Starship damage the launch pad or perform a hot staging maneuver. If everything goes smooth, the FAA might complete the evaluation process by early next month. But most importantly, the key goal of this launch is to catch the Super Heavy booster. Musk has repeatedly hinted that the company will attempt to catch the Super Heavy booster in the next flight, which will also accelerate the upper stage of Starship to near orbital velocity for another re-entry demonstration over the Indian Ocean. If SpaceX succeeds with the next Starship flight, these arms will close together to catch the first stage booster as it descends back to Earth and slows down to hover just above the launch pad. This method of rocket recovery differs significantly from how SpaceX lands the smaller Falcon 9 boosters, which have landing legs to touch down on offshore platforms or concrete landing sites onshore. According to SpaceX, catching the rocket with large metal arms, sometimes called Mechazilla arms or chopsticks, will reduce the turnaround time for reusing boosters and simplify their design. SpaceX has launched the nearly 400-foot-tall Starship rocket 4 times, most recently in June, when the 233-foot-tall Super Heavy booster made a precise landing in the Gulf of Mexico, just off Starbase's coast. During the same flight in June, the upper stage of the Starship flew halfway around the Earth and re-entered the atmosphere over the Indian Ocean. The vehicle survived re-entry and landed in open waters northwest of Australia. This flight was the first time either part of the Starship rocket returned to Earth intact, but SpaceX did not recover the booster or the spacecraft. Since that launch, SpaceX has made several changes to Starship. They've replaced thousands of heat shield tiles on Starship for the next mission and upgraded the design for a new version of the prototype, of course, featuring the most powerful and compact Raptor 3 engines. Eventually, SpaceX wants to recover the ship by landing it on land, similar to the boosters. But Elon has previously said he expects it's going to take at least a few more flights before SpaceX is ready to take that step. SpaceX's long-term goal is to rapidly reuse both major components of Starship, unlocking lower launch costs and enabling all the rocket's revolutionary capabilities, like routine daily flights to orbit and regular heavy cargo and crewed missions up to Mars. That's still years away, though. In the short to medium term, SpaceX is contracted with NASA to use Starship as a crewed lunar lander for the Artemis program. SpaceX also wants to use Starship to launch the next-gen Starlink internet satellites. But Starship is still in its initial testing phase, with SpaceX first focusing on getting the rocket into space, then recovering the Super Heavy booster. The next steps include recovering the ship intact, demonstrating its ability to restart its engines in space, and testing the refueling technology needed for future missions to the Moon and Mars. Okay, so recently we have probably not seen too much info about SpaceX's Starship HLS lunar lander, but that doesn't mean SpaceX and NASA aren't focused on developing this. More than we think, these two organizations are intensifying design changes and conducting crucial tests to create the newest and most unique lunar lander variant ever. Okay, so it's understandable why new variants take time to develop, as they are constantly evolving to change the most optimal and efficient design for a successful journey to the lunar surface. Since SpaceX won the HLS contract in 2021, NASA and SpaceX have revealed some renderings of the exterior of Starship's HLS. At that time, the vehicle looked quite similar to a standard Starship, although the aerodynamic control surfaces and heat shields were removed. The crew would access the lunar surface via an elevator, and power would then be supplied by a small ring of solar panels around the nose of the lander. Since then, the design of Starship HLS has changed a lot. NASA and SpaceX have optimized their lander to overcome the unique challenges posed by lunar exploration. On November 2nd last year, 2 drawings believed to be of the new design for the Starship human landing system got leaked by David Willis on X. The accuracy of these drawings could not be confirmed, but to be honest, they appear pretty similar to previous official descriptions that SpaceX gave of the vehicle. To start with, this design of the Starship lander is taller than previous versions, comparing the scale between old and new renderings. But how accurate this is remains to be seen. As early as December 2021, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk hinted that this company might increase the size of Starship's fuel tanks. And now SpaceX is starting with larger Starship version 2 prototypes. So there's no reason that Starship HLS could not be taller as well. By extending the fuel tanks of the Starship, SpaceX will be able to load more fuel onto the lander. This decision could be an effort to enhance the performance of the Starship for lunar missions, which requires more delta-v, change in velocity, than flights to low Earth orbit. Additionally, the HLS Starship must remain in lunar orbit for up to 100 days while waiting for the crew to get there. Larger fuel tanks will allow it to carry enough liquid methane and liquid oxygen for landing, even accounting for fuel loss due to evaporation in space. SpaceX has also adjusted the paint scheme of the lander. In every rendering released so far, HLS has been painted white. This coating is not just for aesthetics. White surfaces reflect nearly 100% of the incident solar radiation, helping to reduce the rate of fuel boil-off. While this remains true for most of the vehicle, the new renderings reveal that its engine section is painted black. The reason for this might be that black surfaces absorb most of the incident solar radiation, which could help keep the 6 Raptor engines of the Starship warm in the moon's cold shadows. Aside from minor changes in deployment angle and spacing, the 4 landing legs of the Starship don't seem to have changed much. However, they are no longer housed inside enclosed aerodynamic fairings. Instead, they're simply retracted and pressed tightly against the body of the lander during launch. This decision indicates that the landing legs are strong enough to withstand the high winds blowing past the rocket at hundreds of miles an hour as it ascends through the atmosphere. Additionally, it implies that Starship's Super Heavy booster will generate enough thrust to counteract the drag from these 4 protrusions. The most noticeable additions to the Starship lunar lander in this rendering are its 5 large solar arrays. These arrays will serve as the primary power source for the lander in space and on the lunar surface. During launch, each solar array is stowed in a rectangular compartment beneath the crew cabin. Depending on the design that SpaceX has chosen to use, they will then unfold or roll out to a deployed length of about 60 feet. The solar arrays are spaced 30 degrees apart in a hexagonal pattern. One panel is omitted so that the commander and pilot of Starship can get a clear view of the moon's surface during landing and to deploy the elevator for the moonwalkers. While the HLS is orbiting the Earth or moon, the solar arrays will be oriented perpendicular to its fuel tanks. The spacecraft will point its nose toward the sun so that all 5 arrays can generate power. It wouldn't be surprising if they got retracted during landing to avoid damage from vibrations or debris kicked up by the engines, although this hasn't been confirmed by the renderings. When the Starship's on the moon's surface, the arrays will be positioned along the lander's body. At the moon's south pole, the sun's always close to the horizon. Therefore, this vertical orientation will maximize the amount of energy the lander can collect on the moon. Notably, these solar arrays may have a larger collective surface area compared to the small cylindrical array introduced in previous renderings. Therefore, the energy requirements of the lander could have increased. The increased power budget could be used to power the 450 kilos of equipment that Artemis 3 is going to carry, to run cryocoolers that can extend the storage time of the liquid oxygen and liquid methane, or for completely different purposes. The new renderings also confirm that Starship HLS will be equipped with small landing thrusters beneath the crew cabin. Most of the powered descent of Artemis 3 will be handled by Raptor's engines. However, these 6 powerful engines are likely to cause significant interactions between the plume and the surface during landing, kicking up large amounts of rock and dust beneath the lander. Instead, Starship will gently be lowered to the moon's surface by these small elevated thrusters. And more recently, in a NASA article from April, the agency showed us another rendering. Checking out this design, we immediately see differences between the new lander and the previous one. The large solar panels are no longer there. Instead, there's a smaller black ring below the hatch. There are no longer any cabin windows for the crew, reminding us that both vehicles will be fully automated. The most striking feature is the new cargo crane, much larger, taking up most of the open body of the ship to support a massive crane. This crane is unloading what appears to be the initial design of a pressurized rover. This type of vehicle is being deployed by the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA, and Toyota for NASA. And it's not just the new renderings that show the development of preparations for Artemis next year. It's also reflected in the successful milestones previously achieved by SpaceX in cooperation with NASA. SpaceX has completed what the company calls a propellant transfer demonstration, something that's never before been done in a microgravity environment. According to a December email from NASA explaining the test, the goal was to transfer 10 tons of liquid oxygen on the Starship vehicle from one tank to another. This is a stepping stone for Starship refueling to be able to perform in-space refueling capabilities for spacecraft, especially crucial for the mission of Starship's HLS. To undertake the 1.4 million mile journey to the moon, Starship is going to need to fully load those tanks. Although a SpaceX rep stated that they need to review flight data to determine their success in fuel transport, just by completing this mission, SpaceX will have gained tons of new insights regardless of how things go, and that'll enable them to upgrade their prototypes. Of course, we all want the most positive outcome, and that's success. Furthermore, in March of this year, SpaceX and NASA successfully did a 10-day trial of the new Starship HLS assembly system. They executed over 200 different assembly scenarios at various speeds and angles. The results from this comprehensive testing will be integrated into the existing computer models of the system, which will then inform future testing and design. During this round of tests, NASA and SpaceX demonstrated the soft capture procedure. In passive capture, the chaser extends its soft capture system, SCS, while the target spacecraft system stays retracted. The chaser does all the work. It employs latches and other mechanisms that grab the target spacecraft and then complete the docking. HLS requirements state that there must be redundancy in crew egress-ingress. The soft capture procedure seems to address this if the docking system works while the docking system stays retracted. In addition to these achievements, SpaceX has also done astronaut testing for the elevator of Starship's HLS. The elevator will transport the equipment and crew between the living area of the Starship, located near the top of the lander, and the moon's surface as they step outside for those moonwalks. The testing allowed astronauts to interact with the elevator system's flight-like design, serving both as a demo of the hardware functionality and giving valuable feedback from the crew's point of view. Constructed at SpaceX facility in California, the elevator model features a full-size basket with operational mechanical clusters and crew interfaces for testing. During the demo, NASA astronauts wore spacesuits simulating the size and mobility constraints that the crew will face on the moon. The tests gave feedback on elevator controls such as gate locks, deployment interface for accessing and exiting the elevator basket, available for space cargo, and activities during basket movement along the vertical rail system. Besides the elevator testing, we cannot overlook an important experiment with the engines of the lunar variant of Starship. In August 2023, SpaceX demoed the optimized vacuum performance of the Raptor engine through a successful test, confirming that the engine could start in extremely cold conditions due to prolonged exposure in space. One challenge that distinguishes Artemis missions from missions in LEO is that the lunar lander can sit in space without firing for an extended period, causing the hardware temperature to drop lower than it would experience in shorter low Earth orbit missions. This mission brought success to Starship for such a complex component as the Raptor engine. If these tests alone may have left you somewhat skeptical about the stable development of Starship's HLS, in reality, SpaceX has surprised us already by having an integrated HLS model with life support systems. Since August of last year, a notable development has occurred: the emergence of specially designed white cone-shaped noses that experts think represent the cabin model from the HLS Starship variant reserved for meticulous testing. What sets them apart from others is that they include rectangular doors along with intricate systems of wire tubing and complex control panels. This clearly demonstrates life support components, indicating rapid progress in critical testing protocols. Simultaneously, the company is navigating a phase of transformative design modifications for this monumental lunar lander, aiming to forge an optimal and finely tuned product tailored precisely to the mission's demands. Just like historical dynasties that eventually collapse and get replaced by new ones, Boeing is experiencing a similar fate, with its golden era now just a thing of the past. Looking back 7 years ago in 2017, Boeing's then CEO Dennis Muilenburg told Jim Cramer, host of CNBC's program, that eventually we're going to Mars, and I firmly believe the first person to set foot on Mars will get there on a Boeing rocket. Elon responded to the comment on X and said, "Do it." Boeing accepted the challenge, responding to the rival CEO with a short "game on." If it were back then, any of us would have thought that Boeing would definitely beat out SpaceX, not to mention landing on Mars, even with their achievements in space and Boeing's pride in their past successes, like their participation in the historic Apollo program and their construction of some modules on the space station. Boeing was very confident in their strong capabilities. But surprisingly, in just a short period, Boeing has gone from being a well-performing company to one that can't stop making mistakes in every aspect. On the other hand, as of now, SpaceX is the clear winner. They are the world's leading provider of rocket launch services. With rockets that land themselves on autonomous drone ships, their own astronauts, their crew vehicle, and the Starship under development, SpaceX is eons of miles ahead. For the past 4 years, the Dragon spacecraft has been the only vehicle to transport astronauts to and from ISS. An even bigger advantage is that Dragon got assigned to resupply cargo back in 2012. Moreover, SpaceX's Dragon is now considered a solution to save Boeing's Starliner project. This not only prevents the old giant Boeing from getting out of the mud, but also deals a severe blow to the morale of the company's whole staff. Boeing's employees have been humiliated after NASA's decision regarding Starliner. "We've had so many embarrassments lately. We're under a microscope," one Boeing worker said, speaking under the condition of anonymity. "This made it like 100 times worse. We hate SpaceX," he added. "We talk smack about them all the time, and now they're bailing us out." In the spirit of a rapid decline, this worker stated that many people at Boeing are blaming NASA for this humiliation. "They have their own PR issues and don't need 2 dead astronauts," he said. "But we didn't think that there would be dead astronauts. We'd never have recommended they use that if they thought that was going to be unsafe for them." Elon also commented on this. "Arguably a natural turn of events, just as the car companies did not dominate the medium of air. They tried. The aircraft companies will not dominate the medium of space." So not only does this affirm that changes in the space industry are natural, but it also seems that Elon feels the need to remind Boeing's employees and everyone else that each new field is going to get led by specialized companies, not the old school giants who succeeded in previous fields. This means that even though SpaceX is a newer player compared to Boeing, which has decades of experience, SpaceX certainly creates major breakthroughs in the market, potentially surpassing all other companies. Furthermore, Elon expressed a more positive outlook on Boeing's struggles. "The new Boeing CEO is spending time in the factories. That's the right thing to do," Elon said. The new CEO of Boeing, Kelly Ortberg, took the reins of the company from Dave Calhoun earlier this month. In reality, from the perspective of this CEO, making decisions regarding the Starliner program is quite challenging. Boeing is facing a dilemma, balancing its national obligations with the strain on its cash reserves. After weeks of testing and heated debate, the space agency decided using SpaceX was safer. The specter of NASA astronauts being stuck in space is just one embarrassing moment of many for Boeing during an epically bad year that's included a near-catastrophic blowout of a 737, federal investigations, and an executive suite shakeup. That leaves Ortberg, who took over the top job earlier this month, and the senior leadership, known internally as Xcode, to face thorny questions about the company's commitment to human spaceflight and Starliner. Before Ortberg joined Boeing, executives had vowed to honor the company's contract to ferry astronauts to the ISS for NASA. Bill Nelson, NASA's top leader, said Ortberg recently voiced support for continuing Starliner program after the craft sent back from the space station without the people on board. "He expressed to me an intention that they will continue to work the problems once Starliner is back safely and that we'll have a redundancy in our crewed access to the space station," the NASA admin said. But as a new leader brought in to get Boeing back on track after years of turmoil, Ortberg has free rein to make sweeping changes and some unpopular calls, including potentially scuttling the human spaceflight initiative. Do they ultimately exit the program because it's too complicated? Boeing can't recover its investment, and because the other guy can do it better, said Robert Springarn, an analyst with Melius Research. It can happen. Much is going to depend on how Starliner performs during its return flight to Earth without the astronauts on board next month. NASA's not ruled out certifying the Boeing craft, although it could require another test flight before the capsule is allowed to carry astronauts again. That could cost Boeing about $400 million based on charges the company booked to redo an earlier test flight. The agency's experts are still not certain why thrusters certainly stopped working. So, how many crew transfer flights does NASA plan to carry out using Boeing's Starliner and SpaceX's Dragon before they end ISS operations? And when will NASA admit that maintaining 2 companies to provide astronaut transportation services is no longer necessary? Since it was determined that astronauts should not stay in zero gravity for more than 6 months to avoid long-term health issues, there are now 4 crew transfers to the ISS each year, 2 by Russia and 2 by NASA. NASA often flies astronauts from other companies, so it's not always 4 Americans. The Soyuz rocket can carry 3 astronauts, while SpaceX's Dragon and Starliner can carry 4. This arrangement means the ISS typically has a permanent crew of 7. During crew changeovers, there's usually an overlap of a few days, bringing the total number of people on board to as many as 11. Occasionally, space tourists have also visited the ISS, which can temporarily increase the crew size to 11 for a week or so. The ISS is currently scheduled to be deorbited in 2030. As of third quarter this year, a NASA crew exchange is in progress. Here's the projected schedule for the next couple years. First quarter of next year, Russian crew exchange. Second quarter of next year, NASA crew exchange. This pattern continues with 2 NASA flights and 2 Russian flights every year through 2029 and possibly one more in 2030. This means there could be about 10 or 11 more NASA flights and a similar number of Russian flights before ISS gets deorbited. Under the Commercial Crew Program, both Boeing and SpaceX were each contracted for 6 full crew transfers, and those contracts have already been paid out. SpaceX has since secured more contracts because they have to fly missions that Boeing was originally supposed to handle. Looking forward, there are 4 possible scenarios. 1, Boeing completes their 6 missions and their contract gets extended for more flights. 2, Boeing completes their 6 contracted missions and SpaceX handles the last 4 or 5. 3, Boeing's flights are canceled, the money paid to them is written off, and SpaceX does all the 10 or 11 missions. 4, NASA decides to delay the scrapping of ISS, changing out the entire situation. Of these scenarios, it's incredibly likely that Boeing's contract is going to get renewed after 6 missions. Boeing's cost per mission is twice that of SpaceX, and they likely could not manage launches every 6 months due to their slower cadence. NASA might be forced to let Boeing fly their 6 contracted missions simply because canceling would be a waste of tax dollars. However, this is also unlikely if Boeing doesn't fix their ongoing issue with Starliner soon. SpaceX is going to continue to cover Boeing's missions as they're currently doing, making it inevitable that Boeing is not going to do all 6 missions. There are also other potential complications as well. Russia suggested that they might abandon their section of the ISS before the end of the decade, which would leave the station undermanned for maintenance and research. If Russia pulls out early, NASA might need to increase its crew launches to fill the gap. Overall, the outcome of Starliner is well-deserved. They shouldn't blame anyone, not even NASA, because NASA has been more than favorable to them through now. Nowadays, NASA usually puts most of its requests for proposals for competitive bidding, creating a new environment where emerging private companies now have the opportunity to compete on equal footing with these traditional big dogs. And this raises the question, why are companies like Boeing struggling with fixed-price contracts compared to the older cost-plus contracts? Proposals are evaluated based on both price and technical merit, and newer private companies seem to be doing well in both these areas. It could also be that older public companies are just overly bureaucratic and focused on short-term shareholder profits and executive bonuses. In Boeing's case, since their merger with McDonnell Douglas, perhaps the company's just led by too many MBAs and not enough engineers, leading to a prioritization of quick profits over actual quality. In high-stakes industries where failure is not an option, ensuring success is going to be more expensive if a company doesn't iterate its design process using quick, inexpensive testing. The modern agile design method, which involves failing fast and learning from mistakes, allows for some flexibility in planning. However, the traditional waterfall approach requires getting everything right the first time, making quality control critical. Otherwise, mistakes become a lot more expensive to fix later on. Listen, I'm not an industry insider. Recent quality control issues at Boeing and Lockheed Martin do come to mind. These include Boeing's plane crashes, missing door panels, wheels, and emergency slides falling off, not to mention software bugs, helium leaks, flammable wiring, and failing thrusters on the Starliner spacecraft. Similarly, Orion has faced problems like inaccessible batteries, fire safety concerns, and excessive charring. These issues seem to reflect a much broader problem with quality management. All right, so we all know Elon's plans to colonize Mars is ambitious to say the least. To achieve this goal, SpaceX has got to reinvent all current technologies while also inventing new ones. Raptor engine is truly groundbreaking, but now its new generation is on a different level and unlike anything else. So, how did SpaceX redesign its new Raptor engine in a way that shocked everyone in the world? The history of rocket engines can be traced back to 400 BC, when a Greek Pythagorean named Archytas propelled a wooden bird along wires using steam. However, it was not powerful enough to take off under its own thrust. So we'll be focusing on engines developed to take people and objects into space. Goddard began to use liquid propellants in 1921, and by 26 became the first to launch a liquid propellant rocket. Staged combustion was first proposed by Alexei Isaev in 1949. The first staged combustion engine was the S-15400 used in the Soviet planetary rocket designed by Melnikov, a former assistant to Isaev. About that same time, in 1959, Nikolai Kuznetsov began work on the closed-cycle engine NK-9 for Korolev's orbital ICBM GR-1. Kuznetsov later evolved that design to the NK-15 and NK-33 engines for the unsuccessful lunar N-1 rocket. Meanwhile, in the West, the first laboratory staged combustion test engine was built in Germany in 1963 by Ludwig Bollichau. Liquid hydrogen engines were first successfully developed in the States. The RL-10 engine first flew in '62. Its successor, the Rocketdyne J-2, was used in Apollo's Saturn V rocket to send humans to the moon. The high specific impulse and low density of liquid hydrogen lowered the upper stage mass and overall size and cost of the vehicle. It's easy to see that many of the above engines were developed by state agencies. But as time went on, many more private companies joined the business. And they can even do it better. A great example of this is SpaceX's Raptor engine. In fact, it took SpaceX a few years and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make reusable rockets a feasible option. And now Falcon 9s are the industry standard for reusable rockets. With the success of Falcon 9 and Merlin engines, SpaceX decided to stick to a similar philosophy of reuse. When SpaceX said they'd reimagine rocket engine technology, they really did it. The journey to the current remarkable Raptor engine has been a long process of impressive developments by SpaceX. It wasn't by chance they were able to create such a clean, compact, and powerful Raptor engine. When designing and producing the Raptor, SpaceX always adhered to a famous saying by Elon. The best part is no part. The best process is no process. It weighs nothing, costs nothing. Can't go wrong. Raptor 1 was used in a suborbital test flight and on vehicles up to Booster 4 and Ship 20. The engine was still a prototype. It only had a thrust at 185 tons and was quite heavy, with the engine itself weighing 2,080 kilos and 3,630 kilos when all vehicle-related cargo and hardware got added. When transitioning from Raptor 1 to 2, we can see the overall design became a lot more streamlined and just simpler. Flanges were converted into welds, components like the heavy turbine machinery, combustion chamber, and nozzle and electronics all got redesigned, and parts like plumbing, torch igniters, and wiring were greatly reduced. Raptor 2 has since used Booster 7 and Ship 24. To date, it's the most mass-produced engine in Starship's program, with at least 569 engines made, and possibly more. The engine operates at 230 tons of thrust and is a lot lighter than Raptor 1. Specifically, Raptor 2 shed up to 1,630 kilos, making it 450 kilograms lighter than Raptor 1. With additional vehicle hardware, it weighs about 2,875 kilograms. Moving on to Raptor 3 now. This engine's a bit more sophisticated, with most of the external plumbing relocated inside or completely eliminated. Most of the internal plumbing consists of regenerative cooling channels integrated into the engine casing. This allows SpaceX to operate the engine at higher pressures and eliminate the heavy heat shield currently used on Raptor 2. The thrust of this engine is the highest at 280 tons, and it weighs 1,525 kilos or 1,720 kilograms with the additional vehicle components. Moreover, the removed parts were the most vulnerable during engine operation, so these upgrades help reduce a lot of risks, making the engine even more reliable. The engine's cost has also gone down significantly to around $2 million an engine, or even $200,000 with mass production, according to Elon's claims. But will this be the end of SpaceX's development path as they strive for even more perfection? Elon mentioned that the SpaceX engine's thrust should be increased to 300 to 335 tons an engine, which could be a 3X engine or a new version 4.0. This means 33 SpaceX Raptor engines will provide Starship with 3 times the thrust to Saturn V. In expendable mode, Starship will be capable of delivering 400 to 500 tons to orbit. The next major change to mention is the engine production capability. Before Raptor 2, SpaceX had been producing Raptor 1 for a while, from 2018 to the end of 2021. During that period, they made 100 Raptor 1 engines. This means that over more than 3 years, SpaceX took nearly 2 weeks to make one engine. By the end of 2021, SpaceX shifted to producing Raptor 2 engines. By 2022, after a year, they had produced 200 Raptor 2s. Thus, their engine production line had significantly gone down to about 2 days an engine. This was announced by Elon in a tweet in May of 2021. As of now, that time has been halved, meaning it only takes about 24 hours to make one engine. With the aforementioned upgrades in minimalist design, the advancements in making Raptor 3 are undeniable. Although we've only recently seen the Raptor engine version 3 with the serial number SN1, we can still speculate. If SpaceX could make one engine a day using the Raptor 2 design, then why couldn't they make multiple engines a day with this new design? If that becomes a reality, it'd be a feat never accomplished by any other engine. Of course, we're going to have to wait for official announcements on this, but what do you think? How many Raptor engines do you think SpaceX can make every day? Leave your predictions in the comments down below. And while we're talking about the Starship rocket being the next big improvement in commercial launch services, Raptor engine itself has got some groundbreaking hardware. Raptor also uses what's known as a full flow stage combustion engine, only the third engine in history to employ this technique. A full flow stage combustion engine refers to how a pump spins a turbine to drive the engine, used what's called a preburner to get this process going by injecting just a small amount of fuel. Now, normally, some of the propellants are expanded in a traditional open cycle engine to start this process, but Raptor's going to use every drop of propellant available, making it one of the most efficient rocket engines ever built. This has been the holy grail of many rocket engine designers for quite some time. This design eliminates a lot of inefficiencies from previous generations of engines while simultaneously handling the crucial business of driving the fuel and oxidizer pumps efficiently without making up a lot of soot that would prevent the engine from getting reused without a bunch of extra work. It also eliminates a lot of seals between the oxygen and fuel pumps that are a common failure point in conventional engines, and it allows low pressure pumps with a much higher pressure combustion chamber. Lowering the pressure in the pumps improves the engine life. Increasing the pressure in the combustion chamber allows for more thrust. The design goal is for the engine to be able to manage 1,000 flights, which is vastly better than anything else out there right now. SpaceX's Merlin is estimated to be able to handle between 10 and 100 launches. The Space Shuttle engines were good for about 7, and then and only then with plenty of refurbishment. Another big win is that the engine is pretty small, which makes it possible to pack over 30 of them into the tail end of a super heavy booster, and that's necessary for what's soon going to be the world's largest rocket, heaviest spacecraft with 150 tons and maybe 100 crew. The other is the use of methane. No methane-powered rocket has ever made it to orbit. With Starhopper's test top, SpaceX's Raptor is the first time a methane-powered rocket engine had actually taken flight. Methane prevents buildups of deposits in the engine compared to other fuels like kerosene, a process known as coking, while its higher performance allows for lower costs. Most previous rocket engines have relied on using fuels like kerosene in place of methane. But the main benefit of using methane is that it has a higher performance than other fuels, meaning the rocket's going to be smaller. Its lower cost, too, means the total cost of launching can go down. This could be crucial because the number of Raptor engines SpaceX is looking to build right now is a lot. Not only that, Raptor's other major innovation over its predecessor is the use of methane, which harkens back to SpaceX's ultimate goal, establishing a city on Mars. According to industry analyst Caleb Williams from the consulting firm SpaceWorks, you could reasonably easily extract methane from the Martian surface and potentially the lunar surface. In other words, SpaceX can in situ resource utilization. This is vital to SpaceX's goal of regular trips to and from Mars with Starship, allowing it to be the most self-sufficient in terms of fuel. So it could be considered the use of methane as the holy grail of establishing a self-sustaining city on Mars. The image of a very large spacecraft landing by gliding down a runway more than a decade ago is likely still an unforgettable memory for all us space enthusiasts. But that doesn't mean we can no longer have a chance to witness such an awesome spectacle. The technology of the space shuttle has been reinvented for the modern era under the name Dream Chaser. NASA's Space Shuttle program was a cornerstone of the Space Transportation System (STS) initiative proposed in 1969 to create a reusable spacecraft to make space travel more cost-effective and accessible. Unlike previous single-use capsules, Space Shuttle was designed with a versatile space plane in mind that could launch like a rocket, operate in orbit as a spacecraft, then come back down to Earth as a glider landing on a runway. Space Shuttle consisted of 3 main components: the orbiter vehicle, where the crew and payload were housed, the external fuel tank, which provided fuel to the orbiter's main engines during launch, and then the solid rocket boosters, which provided the additional thrust needed to escape Earth's gravity. The shuttle's design included ceramic tiles for thermal protection during re-entry, allowing the spacecraft to get reused for multiple missions. Over its 30-year operational period, the Space Shuttle program achieved many milestones, including the launch and repair of numerous satellites, the deployment of the Hubble Space Telescope, and the construction and servicing of the ISS. However, the program also faced some challenges, notably the tragic losses of the Challenger in 1986 and then Columbia in 2003. These accidents, which resulted in the very unfortunate death of 14 astronauts, highlighted critical design flaws and underscored the risks inherent in human spaceflight. The investigation into the Columbia disaster revealed serious issues with the shuttle's thermal protection system and NASA's management processes. As a result, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board recommended the retirement of the shuttle fleet. Coupled with the high costs of maintaining and operating an aging spacecraft, the decision was made to retire the Space Shuttle in 2011. Following the shuttle's retirement, NASA relied on Russia's Soyuz spacecraft to transport astronauts to and from the ISS until the advent of SpaceX's Crew Dragon in 2020. Since then, Dragon and Soyuz have taken turns transporting astronauts to the ISS. But this past year, Dragon's primarily taken on the role. Starliner was also intended by NASA to share these missions with Dragon, but that key seems to be rusted and no longer viable for future use. Regardless, a spaceplane remains an idea that NASA is still intrigued by. Since the retirement of NASA's space shuttle, there have been significant advancements in space technology that have reignited interest in spaceplanes as a viable means of space travel. Innovations in materials science, propulsion systems, and aerodynamics have led to the development of spacecraft that are not only safer, but also more efficient and cost-effective. Traditional space capsules, like those used in the Apollo and Soyuz programs, are typically single-use vehicles that require extensive resources to retrieve and replace after each mission. In contrast, reusable spaceplanes can get flown multiple times, and that cuts the overall cost of getting up to space. This reusability, combined with lower maintenance costs and the ability to land on regular conventional runways, makes spaceplanes an attractive option for both the government agencies and private companies looking to reduce expenses associated with space exploration. Sierra Space's Dream Chaser stands out as a leading example of the modern spaceplane. Building on the lessons learned from the shuttle program, Dream Chaser incorporates the latest advancement in heat-resistant materials, aerodynamics, and propulsion technology. Designed to be a versatile and reliable vehicle, Dream Chaser is capable of both crewed and uncrewed missions, making it a flexible solution for a variety of space ops. Its ability to land on standard runways allows for immediate access to cargo and crew, further enhancing its efficiency and usability. Sierra Space is currently preparing for the first flight of its spacecraft named Tenacity. That's a cargo variant of the DC-100 spaceplane model, aimed at revolutionizing space cargo transport. DC-100 model boasts several innovative design features that enhance both its performance and safety. One advancement is the use of larger heat-resistant tiles, which provides superior protection during re-entry. Despite being only a quarter the size of the shuttle orbiter, Dream Chaser's heat shields are larger, measuring approximately 10 by 10 inches compared to the 6 by 6 inch tiles used by NASA. Similar to the Space Shuttle, each tile on Dream Chaser is uniquely designed, but the vehicle requires just over 2,000 individual tiles. This is a big reduction compared to the approximately 30,000 tiles needed for each Space Shuttle, and that greatly simplifies the replacement process following each flight. Each tile on the spaceplane is made from a more durable material than those used on NASA's spacecraft, though they are still primarily consisting of silica. Most of the white materials visible on the Space Shuttle were thermal blankets rather than tiles. As newer orbiters were built, the vehicles tended to use more thermal blankets to reduce their weight. Dream Chaser features both black and white tiles, while Sierra Space, noting that the primary difference between the two tiles lies in the special additives used in the outer glass coating. Unlike the Space Shuttle, which required certain parts of the orbiter to be reinforced to withstand re-entry temps, such as the nose and leading edges of the wings, NASA used specialized tiles made from reinforced carbon-carbon, or RCC, in those areas to endure those higher temps. In contrast, Dream Chaser does not have RCC tiles. Its standard tiles can withstand temperatures up to 2,600 Fahrenheit for multiple re-entry cycles, while the specialized tiles can endure even higher temperatures for single-use applications. These tiles serve multiple purposes. In addition to protecting the vehicle during re-entry, they help regulate the spacecraft's internal temperature when exposed to direct sunlight. Temperatures can reach up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit in daylight conditions in orbit. The tiles help maintain a stable temperature for experiments and eventually for the humans inside. Complementing the DC-100 is the Shooting Star cargo module, which extends the spaceplane's cargo capacity. It's a 15-foot-long attachment to the back of the Dream Chaser that can carry up to 10,000 pounds of additionalized pressurized and unpressurized cargo, such as scientific equipment and supplies to the ISS during NASA resupply missions. The Shooting Star module is designed not only for cargo transport, but also for waste disposal. During its mission, it can handle critical waste before separating and burning up upon re-entry, thereby maintaining the cleanliness of space operations. The launch and re-entry process for Dream Chaser is meticulously engineered to ensure safety and efficiency. Initially, the spacecraft and its Shooting Star module are encapsulated within a payload fairing on a rocket, protecting them from debris and reducing the ascent load. Once in space, the rocket deploys the Dream Chaser, which then unfolds its wings and solar panels to enter flight configuration. It'll then extend its landing gear and test its systems in performance before docking. These tests include successful communication with the ISS and following its commands, such as holding position and retreating when requested. Just before docking, It will stop 38 feet from the station and wait for the Canadarm2 robotic arm to grab a fixture on the cargo module. Upon completing its mission, the spacecraft comes back to Earth with the Shooting Star module detaching and burning up in the atmosphere, while the DC-100 lands on the runway. This design allows for a quick recovery of valuable cargo and facilitates efficient turnaround for future missions. Future flights may carry up to 11,500 pounds of cargo, bringing back up to 3,500 pounds of cargo to Earth, and be ready for launch again in just 24 hours. After docking with the station, it stays there for 45 days before being detached. It'll then wait for an opportunity to return home where the weather and landing conditions are favorable. The Shooting Star module detaches and burns up in the atmosphere, while Dream Chaser lands on a runway. The onboard computers will commit to the return flight path, and the spacecraft will glide to the landing point at the Launch and Landing Facility at Kennedy Space Center. Of course, that assumes that all goes according to plan. Now the spacecraft is in its final testing and launch preparation phase at the KSC in Florida. Inside the Space Systems Processing Facility, where components of the ISS were once housed, the Dream Chaser is undergoing some pretty extensive work. This includes the installation of the thermal protection system to ensure it can withstand that re-entry, as well as the propulsion system closeout and leak testing. The launch date for Dream Chaser's first flight was initially scheduled this spring. However, it's been delayed. A new launch date has yet to be determined, but is expected to happen next year. Both Sierra Space Team and NASA are working tirelessly to make this launch happen. Looking forward to the future, Sierra Space is actively shaping the future of space exploration through a range of ambitious projects and collaboration. Building on the success of Dream Chaser's DC-100, the company is now working on the development of the DC-200, a spaceplane designed specifically for crewed missions. This next-gen spacecraft will be capable of safely transporting astronauts to and from LEO, offering a versatile and reliable solution for future human spaceflight. In addition to its spacecraft development, Sierra Space is a key partner in the Orbital Reef Project, an innovative space station initiative led by Blue Origin. A central component of the Orbital Reef Project is the development of the Large Integrated Flexible Environment, or LIFE Habitat, a state-of-the-art expandable space structure designed by Sierra Space. The LIFE Habitat is essentially a 3-story inflatable module that can be compactly stored during launch and then expanded in space to provide a spacious living and working environment for the astronauts. This innovative design maximizes usable space while minimizing launch costs, making it a key element in the future of space living. Beyond these commercial ventures, Sierra Space is also expanding its footprint in the defense sector. The company has secured several significant contracts, including a 10-year agreement with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency to develop lunar infrastructure capabilities. This project focuses on extracting oxygen and storing energy on the moon, which are critical for sustaining future lunar missions. Additionally, Sierra Space just got awarded a $740 million contract by the Space Development Agency to develop 18 missile warning and tracking satellites, further cementing its role in national security and defense. A decade ago, SpaceX, a young and not yet regarded company, and Boeing, one of NASA's leading contractors, both won a multi-billion-dollar contract to develop the Dragon and Starliner spacecraft, aiming to end the United States' reliance on Russia for transporting astronauts to the International Space Station. A decade later, while SpaceX has made sending astronauts to the ISS a pretty routine thing, Boeing's Starliner project is on the verge of collapse due to its failures to complete its first crewed test flight as planned. Even SpaceX had to save Starliner's astronauts. This is a major failure for such a long-established aerospace company like Boeing. So, what does the future hold for Starliner and its multi-billion-dollar commercial contract they have with NASA? Once a symbol of American greatness, Boeing has seen its reputation suffer since 2 of its 737 passenger planes crashed in 2018 and 19, resulting in the death of 346 people. The safety of the company's products has been under increased scrutiny since a panel of one of the planes exploded during a flight in January of this year. And now NASA has decided that it would be safer to keep astronauts in space until February rather than risk using the Boeing Starliner capsule that brought them to the ISS. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said the decision to send the Boeing capsule back to Earth empty is a result of commitment to safety. Indeed, this is a major blow to Boeing. The final conclusion is that the first test mission of the Starliner was not completed successfully. Although NASA has not officially labeled the outcome of the test, no matter what name it was given, the failure is evident to the public. According to the previous plan, Boeing was confident in the safety of the Starliner spacecraft, which was supposed to return to Earth with the crew inside. NASA targeted no earlier than August 2025 for Boeing to conduct the first crew rotation mission out of 6 operational missions to the space station. However, with the Starliner coming back to Earth in early September without anyone on board, it seems there's not going to be a launch till next year. Regardless of the Starliner schedule, considering the lifespan of the ISS through 2030, Boeing's never going to be able to fulfill the mission of the commercial crew contract awarded by NASA. Naturally, NASA will not rely on the Starliner, but will also use the more reliable Dragon for missions to the ISS. Notably, NASA has only granted Boeing authorization to proceed for 3 of the 6 potential Starliner missions. This milestone, known as authorization to proceed, is a crucial point in the contract where the customer, in this case NASA, places an official order for delivery product. Previously, NASA stated that it placed these mission orders about 2 to 3 years before launch. The commercial crew contracts are built on an indefinite delivery, indefinite quality IDIQ agreement whereby NASA can order individual missions from SpaceX and Boeing as needed. If SpaceX continues to perform well and the space station indeed ceases operations by 2030, NASA officials may decide that they do not need more than 3 operational flights of the Starliner. That means NASA will change a policy that's been in place for a decade and a half. In addition to ensuring redundancy for crew transportation of the space station, another reason NASA chose both Boeing and SpaceX in 2014 was to encourage competition in technical capability and price between the two companies. A decade later, it's clear there's only one winner based on these criteria. Yes, none other than SpaceX, which faced significant challenges in the competition for the commercial crew contract under NASA's bias. Even NASA officials admit that decades of working with Boeing have given them a certain level of trust. As a result, they may not have scrutinized the company as much as they should have, while they were also taking a closer look at SpaceX, which was also developing a capsule to transport people to the space station. We were, I would say, a little more used to the Boeing process, Steve Stitch, manager of NASA's commercial crew program, said. It's one that we have used in the past on successful NASA programs like Space Shuttle and the ISS. But the present shows that it's SpaceX's Dragon that NASA needs to trust more than any other vehicle. The decision to bring the 2 astronauts on Starliner back on Dragon is entirely appropriate, further highlighting SpaceX's importance to the U.S. space industry. Conversely, Boeing seems to have returned to the shadows following previous issues that delayed Starliner's first crewed flight by nearly 4 years, requiring a second uncrewed test flight and costing the company over $1.5 billion outside the fixed price contract with NASA. Recent problems with Starliner, such as helium leaks and thruster issues, have led to 2 months of extensive testing and analysis, increasing the mission cost by an additional $125 million. Other troubles related to Starliner have occurred following Boeing's continuous struggle to reassure the public after 2 plane crashes, a near accident with an Alaskan Airlines flight earlier this year, and more recent issues with the upgraded version of the company's long-range aircraft, which have shaken confidence in this aerospace giant. But from NASA's point of view, Nelson said that he has faith in Boeing, the prime contractor of the ISS and the agency's SLS moon rocket, calling the contractor a great partner for NASA over the years. So, will this trust provide any further opportunities for the Starliner? Starliner might have a chance to do more flights when private space stations under NASA's management emerge. After the ISS retires, NASA wants commercial companies to deploy human outposts in LEO. Ideally, these future space stations will be cheaper to operate than the ISS and will be open for NASA and commercial businesses to make money on them. Operators of future space stations will need transportation for crew and cargo, just like the ISS. Some companies involved in commercial space stations are in direct competition with SpaceX. For example, Blue Origin, Bezos' company, has paired up with Boeing to ferry people to and from the proposed orbital reef space station using Starliner instead of picking SpaceX for this task. However, many questions remain unanswered about when the first commercial crew space stations might enter orbit and the market prospects for these projects. Ultimately, human lives at stake and a profit margin to worry about, the owner of a private space station is almost certain to use the less expensive, proven-to-fly vehicle for getting people to and from orbit. NASA and its international partners have not ruled out the possibility of extending the ISS's lifespan beyond 2030. If that does happen, Boeing's Starliner could participate in more crewed flights. However, once NASA and its partners authorize deorbiting of the ISS, its dramatic descent through the atmosphere will not only mark the end of over 30 years of the space station's operations, but could also signal the end of Boeing's adventure in the realm of commercial human spaceflight. But before thinking further about this, it seems we need to see how NASA handles this failed mission of the Starliner. NASA and Boeing have to answer about how the Starliner program reached this point. The space agency approved the launch of the Starliner CFT mission in June despite knowing that the spacecraft had those helium leaks in the propulsion system. These leaks increased when Starliner reached orbit, which in itself was a serious issue that needed corrective action before the next flight. Ultimately, the problems with the thrusters surpassed the severity of the helium leaks, and this is where NASA and Boeing may face the toughest questions in the future. Boeing's previous Starliner mission, called the Orbital Flight Test 2 (OFT-2), successfully launched in 2022, docked with the space station, and then returned to Earth for a parachute landing in New Mexico. The test flight achieved all its major objectives, setting the stage for this year's crewed flight test mission. However, the spacecraft also experienced thruster issues on that flight. Some thrusters of the reaction control system failed when Starliner approached the space station during the OFT-2 mission, and another thruster failed during the return leg of the mission. Engineers thought they fixed the issue by introducing a software patch to adjust timing settings and tolerances on sensors in the propulsion system provided by Aerojet Rocketdyne. But that ultimately did not work and led to a disappointing outcome for Boeing's Starliner and for NASA. As for the issues Starliners came into this time, Boeing firmly insisted that they did not affect the return of the two astronauts to Earth. The helium leaks are understood, Boeing said. They've not gotten worse, and more than enough of the pressurized gases on board to push propellants to the thrusters needed to maneuver and stabilize the spacecraft through the critical deorbit braking burn to drop out of orbit for re-entry and landing. Likewise, Boeing engineers believe they understand what caused a handful of aft-facing maneuver jets to overheat and fire then lower than expected thrust during rendezvous with the space station, causing the Starliner's flight computer to shut down during approach. Ground tests of a new Starliner thruster fired hundreds of times under conditions that mimicked those aboard the spacecraft experience replicated the overheating signature, which was likely caused by multiple firing during tests of the capsule's manual control system during extended exposure to direct sunlight. The higher-than-expected heating likely caused small steels in the thruster valve poppets to deform and expand, the analysis indicates, which reduced the flow of propellant. The thrusters aboard the Starliner were test-fired in space under more normal conditions and all operated properly, indicating the seals returned to a less intrusive shape. But there's no way to guarantee the seals won't deform again during thruster firings after undocking or during the deorbit burn when larger rocket motors would generate higher temperatures in pods housing the smaller thrusters, which are needed to maintain the spacecraft's stability for a precisely targeted landing. We're committed to the mission, which is to bring Butch and Suni back, said Steve Stitch, NASA's commercial crew program manager. But as we got more and more data over the summer and understood the uncertainty of that data, it became very clear to us that the best course of action was to return Starliner uncrewed. That's all for today's episode. Thanks